Welcome to the VitalDocTalk podcast. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Heather Overland. Welcome to the show, Dr. Overland. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Awesome. And so one thing that really impressed me about you was obviously your background. Why don't you give the audience a quick overview of how you got into medicine and then what you're doing to grow your practice today?
Sure. So I own Overland Wellness. And I'm a naturopathic physician as well as a licensed acupuncturist. I was trained as a primary care doctor with a focus on holistic and preventive medicine. And in addition to medical school, I got my master's of science in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. I got into all of that mainly because I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I love to be in nature, and I feel that that connection to health is so important. And so I became that sort of holistic healthcare provider that I am.
That's awesome. And then you actually built your own website, is that right?
I did.
I think that very few doctors can actually do that. What were some of the hardships or challenges you had when building a site, and how did you overcome those?
So like many other doctors, my focus is on medicine. I'm really great with different treatments and keeping up to date with patient information and clinical relevancy type things, but building a website is not in medical school. And so my biggest hardship was that it was like learning a foreign language. And when you come to web hosting and actual development, it is a whole nother language, a couple of them. So finding different resources online, tutorials to explain the terms and phrases that I wasn't familiar with and to develop the skills that I needed in order to actually make a website that was successful and reflected my business appropriately was kind of a big learning curve.
Yeah. What were kind of the biggest challenges? Did you make this decision to build your own website like from day one, and you said, okay, I have a practice, I need to build my own website? Did you look at vendors? What spurred that decision?
So, in medical school, looking at my career going forward, I did not anticipate that I would be building my own website. But after being in practice for a while and working with other practices and talking to my colleagues and seeing what experiences they had and how disconnected they were from the process. I knew some people that couldn't even log into their Google business page. And, that's terrible. I didn't want to be like that. And so I thought that the best way to take ownership of my web presence was to literally take ownership of it and develop my website in the way that I wanted it to be and develop my own social media presence and marketing campaigns.
And did you speak to any vendors before you started that journey, or no?
Not super seriously. I spoke to the vendors that some of the previous companies I was with worked with, as we're working on their websites and stuff like that. And I really noticed the lack of communication.
100%.
Yeah.
And let's go into that, right? The irony is, right, like I'm a vendor myself, and we do Google traffic, right? Shameless plug, but they're not all good, right? And I'll want to give doctors a holistic view on this podcast of the different routes they can go, because ultimately it's about empowering them. And sometimes going with a vendor is just might not be the right fit for you, right? There's, as Dr. Overland said, it might not be good communication with the vendor, which is going to really slow down the project. That's going to be horrendous. Also the personal touch element, right? So Dr. Overland, she built her website, and I'm going to link it in the YouTube description below. You guys, and Dr. Overland, she can plug it in as well at the end. You guys can check it out. And that's got that personal touch element that nobody else can claim if you didn't build your own site, right? So there's obviously pros and obviously there's cons too. However, the biggest, I think, pro is even, I think if you're just starting out, you have a good, solid fundamental. So now when you do talk to a vendor, you are going to be head and shoulders above all the other doctors who haven't done this route.
And I truly think that would be the best outcome. Be educated, learn what those terms like local SEO and return on investment mean in that world. And then you can actually speak with a level of understanding with your vendors and not just say, oh yeah, that sounds great, move forward. Great, sounds like an awesome idea. You're going to be able to say, what about this for my practice? And try to actually get something that's appropriate for you. You don't have to do it all yourself. You just have to be aware enough of the process so that you're not looking at someone who's super, has this expertise in web development, but has no expertise on your medicine. You're not going to be miscommunicating.
Yeah, you can bridge that gap yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, Dr. Overland, what were some of kind of the biggest obstacles when building your site? I think what impressed me was you built it on WordPress, which is great, right? It's a platform that we love. So what were the challenges and kind of how did you overcome them?
So some of the challenges were, having the issues of changing something and having it be an experimental process and
Mm-hmm.
maybe changing the wrong thing and then
Mm-hmm.
realizing that my site is no longer there.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
And, finding that it's a lot and how do you have this level of perfectionism of, wow, there's some really awesome websites out there. I can't make it like that. How can I make it so that it's good enough for what my practice needs and accurately
Mm-hmm.
conveys what I do and still has that level of professionalism? That was, I think, the biggest hurdle for me to figure out.
Great. And how did you overcome those things? Was it simply Google? Did you have a friend or a meetup group that you went to or any websites you recommend?
I didn't. The websites I tend to recommend are a lot of the hosting, the web hosting sites like InMotion Hosting, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
various SEO companies. It behooves them to have really good blogs and, customer service FAQ forums. So
Mm-hmm.
you can go there and type in some questions and come up with what they have. And usually that's going to lead to a host of other questions and follow that rabbit hole until you actually understand what you're actually looking for. And that was the process that worked well for me. I think for other people, maybe going to more of meetups or taking an online class would be appropriate. But for me, I was able to then do it at my own speed.
I love that. Those are all really good answers. And, if you guys ever need a community resource besides myself, I'm happy to recommend more. But I think Dr. Overland had a lot of great ones, and the local meetups once coronavirus is over can
Yeah.
be fantastic. So let's say, this doctor came in, they built their own website. What did you do after that to market your business that you feel like really helped it grow?
So your website isn't something that should be static. It should
Mhm.
be somewhat dynamic, changing with your updated blog post, make sure that your location, hours, and everything are current, and make sure that your content is actually flexible enough that it is relevant to your community and relevant to your interest. So if you're getting done with a conference about a certain topic and you really renewed your interest in a certain treatment or procedure that you haven't been focusing on in your practice, you better make sure that your website is reflecting that. And so, having an updated website, connecting with my Google business page, LinkedIn, other social medias like Instagram, that's been my primary way of marketing. I've also tried like Google AdWords and Yelp, but honestly, the best return on investment that I've gotten was from making sure that my web page is up to date and my SEO is appropriate. Okay.
Awesome, Dr. Overland. So, you've been doing great with all this website building. I took a look at your website myself, and I love how it looks. How long did it actually take you to, get the site up?
It's really hard to quantify because it's still, in my perspective, a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
In the very beginning, I was starting at a different practice location and had a little bit more time on my hands. So probably took me about a week to get the foundation of the page the homepage, about, contact, services started. Then I went from there.
I mean, that's really impressive, by the way, 1 week to get it live. And how many pages did you have when it was live first?
Probably about 5.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome, guys. So that's really impressive. And how much time do you think you put into it? Just like a time range. You don't have to give me anything specific. Did you do it like every night from like, like for a couple hours every day?
Yeah, probably a couple hours every day. And then let's say there's a couple hours actually working on the website and then a couple hours actually figuring out what I was doing. So researching different terms, figuring out, has anyone else encountered that problem that I'm seeing? I can't make this table move in the way that I want it to. Do I need to change code or do something else?
That sounds, by the way, guys, you might be impressed, like, oh, you can build a website in a week. And I think most people out there can, if they spend around 3 hours a day for a week, they'll be able to learn how to do website design. It takes around 20 hours to learn. And so her answer makes 100% sense. And then after a while, you can start updating the website, etc. And that's gold. And then, so that's the website element. And I love that. In terms of going back to marketing here, I think you've used Instagram, is that right? And what kind of results have you gotten?
So Instagram for me is more of having an avenue, another avenue that links back to my website, but it's not a really effective marketing tool because I'm not using it as an effective marketing tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different reflection of my practice and my brand,
Mm-hmm.
which is going outside and being active. And it's more of a source of hopefully inspiration for other people so that they want to go outside more and be active and healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and less of oh, I'm a doctor, here's what I do, come to my practice, I need more patients. So that's not really what I want to do.
What really shines through about you and a lot of the doctors that I've also interviewed that have been successful is you're living your brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically you're outdoors, right? You're a naturopath, right? And so basically that goes hand in hand. You practice what you preach. And I think even if your patients don't see you on Instagram, maybe they'll check out a post or something like that. I think your website also reflects that. So I think that's probably the best way you can market yourself. Yeah. So how has coronavirus impacted you?
So I have really taken the opportunity to use more of my telemedicine services than I ever did before.
Mm-hmm.
So I have automated visit questionnaires and video appointments that I had in place previously, but now I'm actually using them every week, every day.
And what kind of like software or maybe an EMR or EHR do you recommend for doctors? Because I know some of them, they had telemedicine options, others didn't. So I'm sure people would, like that insight.
Use the one that works for you. For me, I use Elation EMR with Spruce Secure Messaging System.
Mm-hmm.
It allows me to chart in a way that I feel comfortable with and is in tune with how I think, which is extremely important. A lot of our practice time is spent charting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Spruce messaging is a convenient and HIPAA compliant way to have video visits, to kind of like text with your patients, but it's actually secure. And then also has automated visits that then I can sync up with the EMR.
Okay. I like that. That elevation, a lot of people actually recommended that in the past when I talked to them. So it seems to be a good option. And then, so a lot of doctors obviously that are now doing telemedicine, what would you say are some tips you'd give them that you learned along the way? Because I know that's kind of like a primary, I guess that's really the primary channel that doctors use today to help their patients since we're locked out right now.
Yeah. So when I am having a telemedicine visit, I usually have to pre-walk through the process with the patient. So have a message on their appointment reminder that says, all right, be sure to have the Spruce app open on your phone or computer at your appointment time, and Dr. Overland will call you with a video visit at the time of your appointment. And just that reminder. And then after your appointment, you're going to get your invoice electronically and you can pay it online, or this is where your after visit information is going to come to. And it takes away some of that stress, because I think with new technology and the pandemic right now, a lot of people are under a lot of stress, and our patients might get nervous about using technology that they're unfamiliar with, or they want to do it right and they don't want to, have a missed call or feel like they're having trouble getting into their appointments. And so by kind of reminding them and going through the step-by-step of how that process goes, you really make them a lot more comfortable with it, and you make your appointments a lot more successful and seamless.
I love that. That's awesome. You got to make sure the more prepared you are ahead of time, the easier everything goes. And, I just finished reading this book called The Referral Engine, and who wouldn't want more referrals, right? And so it talks about how the more prepared you are and the easier you make everything in your company, the more it can generate extra referrals, et cetera. So Dr. Overland, thank you so much for being on the podcast. What's one takeaway if a doctor is watching this, you'd like to implement or, should consider?
And say in every aspect of your business, really take ownership of it. So when you're working with outside vendors and companies, oftentimes you have a business associate agreement with them for HIPAA compliance if they're dealing with patient information. And I'd say even with your vendors, as far as your website and non-patient information related stuff, you should have that same level of ownership so that you're accurately reflecting your brand and your practice so that the patients at home can actually connect with you. If you are the best doctor that you can be at a certain procedure or treatment, but you're unable to share that information with your patient's going to be stuck at home and still have the problem that you could actually have helped them with. So I would say work on owning your brand and connecting with your presence and communication, whether it's in your website or some other avenue.
That is gold. That's golden advice, guys, because one of my favorite books, White Coat Investor, that I read about, basically retirement and financial advice, et cetera. They said you need to read a tax book first. It might be super dry. It might be super boring. However, nobody's going to look out for your write-offs and your best interest financially as you are. And it goes everywhere across the gamut. I remember I was brought into a meeting one time and the vendor I felt was getting way overpaid for what they were doing. However, they brought me in, so I didn't want to badmouth them. But the doctor was like, yeah, I rely on the vendor for everything. And in my head, I'm like, man, you're just getting ripped off. Like, ownership is I think the key to every business owner out there, and especially doctors. You can't just rely on like a business manager to know it all, because they don't. Nobody does, right? So that's a great tip. And Dr. Overland, where can we find you? And thank you so much for the show.
So the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is overlandwellness.com. And it will have the contact information. If you want to send in a message, you can do that directly on my site.
Awesome. And we'll plug our info below as well, guys. Thank you for another episode of VitalDocTalk.